So why do we have the Chapter 20 rule? Basically, it's to regulate the size, the arrangement, the regeneration, and the management of clear cuts. So if you're doing any clear cuts at all, you need to understand the Chapter 20 rule. These standards apply statewide. Everywhere in the state, it doesn't matter whether it's an organized territory or an unorganized territory, then Chapter 20 rules apply. They apply to all landowners that have more than 100 acres of total ownership. So if you have less than 100 acres statewide, you're exempt. That means if you've got a 97-acre woodlot, but you've got a 5-acre house lot, that puts you over 100 acres. So you would not be exempt. As it says there, forested or non-forested is counted in that total. Even if you have less than 100 acres, you still are not exempt from the notification of the intent to harvest, the FON, which we're not covering today, but it's something that you do online. You're not exempt from doing landowner reports after the harvest is over, and you're not exempt from the regeneration standards. So you can do that clear cut, but you still need to have the regeneration standards apply. So, excuse me, having problems with my presentation mode here. A parcel is a contiguous tract of land owned by a landowner. So that means right next to each other. And what just popped up there, because now my cursor is working, are non-contiguous because they're joined at just one single place. They're joined right here at this corner. So we wouldn't consider these two to be contiguous tracts. If they were right side by side, they would be. If you've got multiple ones, then you would consider them all one parcel. Contiguous tracts that are completely separated by a public road are considered separate parcels. So if you buy something on one side of the road and you buy something on the other side of the road, then we consider that to be two separate parcels. So understanding what a parcel is very helpful in understanding these rules. So sometimes it's easier to explain by saying what is not a clear cut than what actually is a clear cut. So if you cut 5 acres or less, you can whack it right down to nothing. That's still not considered a clear cut. That is what we consider to be a patch cut. If your harvest retains at least 30 square feet of acceptable growing stock, then that is not a clear cut. Or if you can do a well-distributed overstory removal. And when we're talking about clear cut, we're only talking about trees that are 5.5 inches or larger. We don't consider anything smaller than that when we're determining basal area. An overstory removal is a harvest that leaves advanced regeneration with at least 450 trees per acre of acceptable growing stock that's well distributed across the harvest area. So if you had 1,000 trees per acre on part of it and 200 trees per acre on the other part of it, that is not considered well distributed. The softwood trees that are there have to be a minimum of 3 feet in height, and the hardwood trees must be a minimum of 5 feet in height. And if you have areas in there that are greater than 5 acres that don't meet this condition, then you probably will have a clear cut embedded within your overstory removal. So the first thing there on the left shows that, that's pretty well distributed. You can see over the whole lot, you've got 450 stems per acre, pretty much anywhere that you go. On the right-hand side, you've got a clear cut area. It might have 450 stems per acre, but they're not well distributed. They're contained in very small patches. Unless these small patches are greater than 5 acres, then they become part of the overall cut. So that this is definitely a clear cut here. I mentioned before that it had to be trees of acceptable growing stock, and we sometimes have problems with people who do a cut. We look out there and we go, yep, boy, there's a lot of trees left there, but then you start looking closer and you realize that these are not trees that are acceptable growing stock. So any of these trees listed here, striped maple, mountain maple, willow, flowering dogwood, gray birch, pin cherry, choke cherry, mountain ash, and alder, we do not consider to be acceptable growing stock. So if we're out there doing a cruise to determine whether or not this is actually a clear cut, we would ignore these trees. We would not measure them. We wouldn't count them. So quite often we'll see something that has a whole bunch of gray birch growing up. You know, that's one of the first things that comes up after a harvest. And it might look like you've got plenty of trees there to meet, keep it from being a clear cut. But if you go out and you start looking at them, then you realize that they're gray birch and they won't count. Another thing that we look for unacceptable growing stock is how much damage did you do out there in the clear cut when you cut it? If the trees are leaning more than 30 degrees, we would ignore that tree. We don't count it. If trees have broken, dead, or missing tops, which sometimes happens, you know, you're really not careful swinging around your feller buncher and you're breaking off the tops of all the other trees, those trees no longer count. Also, if you have heavily damaged the root system, those trees would not be counted either. So trees have to have lived at least 2 growing seasons. And if the tree's greater than 8 inches and we've got damage on half of it, then that is not considered acceptable. If the tree is less than 8 inches and has more than 1/3 of the cambium destroyed down here, then we would not count that either. And the other thing that we look for, which is not really shown on here, is that we look for visible damage to the root spread. So if you've gone really close to a tree and you've sunk down in and you've severed more than 1/3 of the roots, that would be unacceptable as well. So these are all things that we're looking for when we go out and do an FPA cruise. And this here is just kind of a picture where there are a whole bunch of dead, broken, and missing tops. If you look at it, you think, wow, there's plenty of trees out there. Certainly we have enough stems per acre. But you start taking a closer look and you see that a large number of them have broken tops. So those are no longer considered to be acceptable growing stock. So if we're out there doing a cruise, all of those trees are going to be disregarded. All categories need to have some sort of separation zone from other clear cuts. If they're too close, then they join together and become one clear cut. And these rules become more stringent as the size of the clear cut becomes larger. So for category 1, the separation zone is basically that it has to be non-clear cut, or it has to meet the OSR requirements of a minimum of 450 stems per acre. Once we get up into category 2 and category 3 clear cuts, then you've got to have at least 60 square feet of basal area left in there, or you have to have 300 trees per acre well distributed, which are 10 feet tall for the softwoods and 20 feet tall for the hardwoods. 40 square feet of those 60 square feet of basal area have to be at least 4.5 inches in DBH or larger. So basically what this is saying is that you can harvest in a separation zone as long as standards are met. You can't put any skid trails located immediately adjacent to the clear cut. Separation zones need to be maintained until at least 10 years have elapsed from the date the clear cut was created, or until the regenerated clear cut contains a minimum of 300 trees per acre of well-distributed ags, and the softwood trees are a minimum of 10 feet in height, and the hardwood trees are a minimum of 20 feet in height. So until that time, you have to be very careful not to cut up close to that clear cut because it may join in with another clear cut. So the minimum width for separation distance is 250 feet. You can't be any less than that when you're talking about doing up to another clear cut. And category 2 and 3 clear cut separation zone areas also have to match the clear cut size 1-to-1. So in this case here, we've got a 30-acre clear cut at category 2, and this would hold true for category 3 clear cuts as well. And you can see that the separation zone has to be a minimum of 30 acres as well. And nowhere can it be smaller than 250 feet wide. So it can be wider than that, but it can't be narrower than that. However, one thing that you can do is you can harvest right up to a boundary and property line. You might have two landowners who own adjoining lots, and they can both clear cut right up to that boundary line. And that does not join together to form a larger clear cut because it's two different landowners. There are other laws governing property lines. If you're going to harvest up to a property line, you have to identify your lines and you have to mark them if you're getting within 200 feet of them. The property line trees themselves cannot be harvested unless you first obtain permission from the abutting landowner. And really, that's a very poor practice to cut property line trees because we all know that that's one of the best ways to get in a fight with your neighbor is to not understand where your property lines are. So cutting that property line out is very, very poor practice. And then also you do have to keep slash away from any property line a minimum of 25 feet. You cannot cut stuff and then decide you're going to get rid of all this slash by piling it up against your boundary line so that you can't see your neighbor. So here's another category 2 clear cut. And again, it would apply to a category 3 clear cut. You can see that they nestled it right down in the corner of the property. You are allowed to cut right up to the property line. However, any separation zone that you have has got to be a minimum of 250 feet from that clear cut. And it can be very irregularly shaped. So you can see this is the delineated part of the the separation zone here. And they've made it 1-to-1. We have 50 acres of sep zone and we have a 50-acre clear cut. And as I said before, we have to have a minimum of 60 square feet of basal area, or we have to have a minimum of 300 trees per acre that are 10 feet and 20 feet tall. One of the things that we're often asked is, can we share separation zone? You can share your separation zone for separation zone width, but you can't use that shared part, as the 1-to-1 sep zone area. So here we've got two 26-acre clear cuts, and they each have a 26-acre 1-to-1 separation zone. They're only required to have 250 feet between them. You don't have to double it up and make 500 feet. So we can share that separation distance, but you can see here we had to bulge out the area around the outside of this one in order to get that full 26 acres. So this would be 250, 250, top and bottom here, 250 all the way around this one minimum. Between the two clear cuts, 250, and then we don't have to we don't have to have larger than 250. We just have to make sure that we have enough 1-to-1 area. Now, one place where people sometimes get into trouble is with their trail spacing. They don't intend to put in a clear cut, but they end up creating one because their skid trails are too close. They're maybe irregularly spaced, and they've taken too many trees out of there. If greater than 30% of the harvest area is in trails, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to have a clear cut there. The residual stocking, is just not enough to keep it out of clear cut. So you can see down here, They were very careful with their trail spacing. They kept them nice and wide. They were very good about having them funnel down into the log yard in a really well-planned manner. Up here, they just kind of went willy-nilly, and they kept going in and making really crooked trails. They weren't sure how close they were getting right here. And so they have an excessive number of trails in there, covers greater than 30%. Remember, you know, it's hard to make a skid trail that's much less than 12 to 15 feet wide with the modern machinery that we use these days. Another thing that you need to be careful of is that a bunch of small patch cuts can combine together and create a clear cut situation. So here we have a nice harvest, about a 40-acre harvest, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like 7 patch cuts. They're all less than 5 acres. Those are all legally patch cuts. The problem is that they probably are going to combine together to create one 24-acre clear cut. The safe distance to have them is 250 feet apart. You can see here, you know, we have them almost touching here. None of these is really quite 250 feet apart. So you can inadvertently put in a bunch of patch cuts and end up with a clear cut. And this is a real life example of how that happened. You can see here that they did a bunch of little patch cuts. Some of them look like they're about 250 feet apart, but others clearly are not. Same thing that happened up here. And when we do an FPA cruise, we actually cruise every acre. We put in a plot per acre. And it's kind of on a modified grid system. Each of the plots is 208 feet apart this way, but we have random starts. So you can see that it doesn't line up necessarily right straight across. So in this case, there was a plot here, 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 and here that all failed. They were opened up too much. And so this cut ended up with a 7-acre clear cut, which is actually a clear cut, remember, because 5 acres is our limiting size. And right here, we ended up also with a 5-acre clear cut. So this was a harvest that was unintentional, but it did end up with 2 Category 2 clear cuts in it. Now, one of the things that you can do, which would not be a clear cut, is when you change to a non-forestry use. And there is a checkbox on the FON, Forest Operations Notification, and you need to tell us that you are changing it to a non-forestry use and what that use is going to be. And then you have 2 years to actually get that change completed. It's the second full calendar year following the end of the year of the timber harvest. So if you finish in July of this year, the 2-year window will start January 1st of 2023. So you have to be really careful about completing that change of use in that time. And sometimes people get into trouble because they think they can change a use into something else quicker than they can with the equipment that they have. You know, if you say, I'm going to change 80 acres to agricultural field, I'm going to kind of want to know what kind of equipment you have that you're going to be able to do that within that 2-year period. If the change is to residential dwelling units, then you can't have anything larger than 5 acres. It has to be limited to the actual size of the lot or 5 acres, whichever one is smaller. So here's a change of land use that resulted in a pretty significant penalty. I guess I'd like to say that they bit off more than they could chew. They got part of it done. They got the stumps out and got it ready to plow and to furrow. And then this other part, they just ran out of steam. Their equipment couldn't handle as much much work as they thought it was going to, and it was not converted within 2 years, and it started growing back into woodland. So the portion that was converted to the agricultural use, we said, yep, that was a change of use. You did it. You got, did what you were supposed to do. They did get a penalty on this other part because they did not get it changed within that 2-year period. Another one, which is coming up quite a bit now, is with people who are doing a solar conversion. So you might think that you're going to have a contract with a company, and so you go in and you clear 24 acres because somebody's told you that they want to use your land for solar. And then they come back and they look at it and they say, yeah, no, that's not suitable for us. It's not on the right aspect, or there's not enough sunlight coming in there. And then they don't actually give you the permit. Well, now you as the landowner are on the hook for a change of use that's not going to happen. So if you're thinking of changing to solar or some other type of thing, you want to make sure you have that contract in hand and you have a commitment from that company before you go ahead and cut larger areas. You might be advised to cut a couple of smaller areas and keep a 250-foot buffer between them until you actually get that contract in hand. So there are some requirements that go along with creating clear cuts as well. Any harvest over 20 acres, which bumps it up into that category 2 or 3. Category 1 is less than 20 acres. Category 2 is between 20 and 75 acres, and category 3 is between 75 and 250 acres. And you are not allowed to do anything larger than 250 acres. For those category 2 and category 3 plans, you have to have a harvest plan that's prepared prior to starting the harvest. And it contains quite a number of different elements that are in the Chapter 20 rules. So if this is your first time doing a clear cut and it's a category 2 or 3, then you should look at the Chapter 20 rules and find out all of the things that are required in that clear cut. It has to also state the purpose for creating the clear cut, and there are really only 4 acceptable ways. I'll talk about those in a minute. If you're doing a category 2 clear cut, you have to keep that plan on hand for a minimum of 7 years, and you have to produce it immediately if the Forest Service asks to see it. If you're going to do a category 3 clear cut, which is more than 75 acres, then the Forest Service actually has to go out and do an on-site review with you before you can do any harvesting. And we require that plan in our hands at least 60 days prior to that. Some of you have submitted your first plans and got the unpleasant sending it back and saying, boy, you need a lot more in here. So once you've written one plan, you usually do pretty well on the rest of them, but it does require we do a review of the actual plan, and then we go out with you to make sure that what you've said is correct, that your separation zone is adequate, that your reason for having the clear cut is also clear. So here are the acceptable reasons for clear cuts. You'll notice that nowhere in here does it say, I just wanted to start over. You can remove poor quality, intolerant, understocked, short-lived, or mature overstory, where there's no reason to retain any of those for seed trees, etc. You can create wildlife habitat, but if you're going to be doing that, you need to have a prescription from a certified wildlife professional that comes in as part of that plan. You can remove timber stands that, if partially harvested, are at high risk for wind throw. Things like, balsam fir that's on a kind of a poor quality site. If you go in there and start picking through it, it might all blow down. So that's an acceptable reason. And then harvesting of existing plantations or forest stands that were established by or previously treated with pre-commercial silvicultural activities. So one of these 4 reasons has to appear in your plan for your clear cut, and then you have to meet all of these other standards that are in Chapter 20. So for FPA compliance, what we're really hoping for is voluntary compliance. We don't like to write settlement agreements. It's a lot of work for us. We would much prefer to have you take up rules and understand them and do things properly. We'd like to inform you if we can, and this is part of the reason why we have all of these classes, so that you can learn about these rules. If you're interested in looking for more information about Chapter 20 and Clearcuts, we did a class 2 weeks ago online, and that is now on our website, I believe, so you can look at it. We do like to do early intervention to prevent violations. If we step out there and we see that we think you're going down a wrong path, we're going to talk with you about it, and we're going to try to get you to fix it now before it becomes a violation. We also have interpretations on our websites which answer a lot of these questions. So I would say go ahead and read the interpretations. If your answer's not in there, then call your district forester and see if they can explain it to you. So the real keys to compliance with the FPA standards are planning ahead, doing proper layout, and then carefully doing on-site harvest supervision. And in all cases, for us, prevention is really preferable to enforcement. We would much rather have things go smoothly. There's no way to fix some of the issues that might come up if we have to enforce things.